Welcome to the 26th Annual Health and Healing Crusade. We're so excited that you have joined us, and we believe that this information is going to touch your life as it's already touched ours. So thank you so much for being here.
Two things we want to get out of the way before we get started is first, you're going to receive daily emails with a link to each session. And secondly, if you haven't shared this already with a friend or loved one, it's not too late to do so because you can still access these sessions even if the day has already passed.
Absolutely. And these sessions will be available for 10 days after the last session airs. So you still have time to go back, to watch, and rewatch the sessions after they air. And before we get started, we would just love to have a prayer with you as we open up this year's Health and Healing Crusade. Dear God, we just come before you, and we're so thankful for the individuals who have joined us for this year's Health and Healing Crusade. I believe it's going to touch somebody's life today and throughout these sessions, dear Lord. And I think of your word in Philippians 4, 6, and 7, be anxious for nothing, but in everything through prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to the Lord. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. So, dear Lord, as we come before you, as we open up this Health and Healing Crusade, we just pray that it will be a blessing to those who are attending. We thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to share this information with so many of the individuals who have joined us this year. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Now, friends, without further ado, we would love to welcome Dr. Joel Fuhrman for our first session. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are with Dr. Joel Fuhrman. He is an international speaker, author, New York Best Time author, and he's been on our stage, and he is a proponent of a Nutritarian diet. So, Dr. Fuhrman, we're excited to have you here today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Dr. Fuhrman, what is a Nutritarian diet?
Well, it's a diet that's scientifically designed to be most lifespan promoting, to push that envelope of human longevity, to fill it up with the foods that have the most documented evidence to prevent cancer, and design that diet style that maximizes human longevity, rich in vegetables and beans and onions and berries and nuts and seeds and all these things that are prolong lifespan. And what I'm saying here is the diet that maximally extends human lifespan is also therapeutically effective when we apply it to people who have chronic medical conditions like diabetes or psoriasis or asthma or headaches. It enables them to make complete recoveries. So it really just enables the miraculous self-healing properties of the human body to fully manifest itself when you have such excellent nutrition. So I think of the word nutritarian as being nutritional excellence. Let's design the best diet we can to maximize human longevity. And now that we agree on the foods in the dietary portfolio that maximize human health, let's make it taste great so people can enjoy it to the fullest. And we find that, wow, we can make a nutritarian diet taste fantastic. And so I use that, even though it's not all G-bombs, we use a huge variety of plant-based foods, because variety of different types of colors and different types of foods help build the healthiest microbiome and the healthiest nutritional, you could say, symphony orchestra, the full symphony of nutrients humans need. But we do want to include those G-bombs in the diet almost every day because they have such documented efficacy to prevent cancer, to maximize human immune function. And those 6 foods, of course, the G-bombs, BOMBS, G stands for greens, so it's greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds like flax seeds and chia seeds and hemp seeds and sesame seeds. So we're using a big salad every day with a nut and seed-based dressing, maybe a wok mixed vegetable dish, vegetable bean soups with onions and mushrooms in them, and maybe breakfast berries and grain with seeds and nuts and plant milk on top. So we're really enabling the body to not to have you could say, the foods that promote excessive cellular replication and growth in an adult, like animal products, especially when you increase animal protein to certain levels, as they go higher, you allow the body to replicate cells that should not be replicating, therefore increasing risk of cancer. So we have three types of foods. We have produce, organic produce preferably. We have processed foods, and then we have animal products. And it's the processed foods and animal products that are the major cause of disease because they don't contain phytochemicals and antioxidants. They contain a concentrated load of macronutrients. And the Nutritarian diet also gets its fat from nuts and seeds and avocados, not from animal fats and oils. The conventional diet gets its fat from oils and animal products, and we get our fat from nuts and seeds, from whole plants, which are a cleaner source and have a completely different biological effect because the fats are absorbed so slowly in the body, so they can be preferentially burned for energy, whereas animal fats and oils are absorbed very rapidly into the bloodstream, which then have them turn on fat storage mechanisms and add to body fat rapidly.
For those who don't know so much about Nutritarian diet, are there any dairy products or animal products that you include?
The Nutritarian diet is preferably plant-based, and it could be utilized in a vegan diet with no animal products or one with a small amount. But I do more and more encourage people use the vegan approach and eliminate the animal products completely, where in the past maybe small amounts would be acceptable, but now with so much additional pollution, to the offshore dumping of plastics, to the offshore growth of algae causing cyanobacteria and BMA in shellfish and low seafood and the plastic in sardine, the gut of sardines, and all these contaminants in our environment. I mean, it really is beneficial to the human toxicity issue, the planet, and also, so we're saying that a Nutritarian diet could be one where you're using animal products as a condiment in a small amount a few times a week. But I do advocate, and at my retreat here in San Diego, we don't use any animal products. We're 100% plant-based or vegan, because it's just when you have a person that has some chronic medical condition that's serious, that we're dealing with, like lupus or psoriasis or advanced heart disease, it's just the effects are more predictable and more effective when we eliminate the animal products completely. So in most cases, we eliminate animal products completely, and for those people that are so desirous of that, then we try to restrict that to a small amount, like as a flavoring or a condiment.
I wanted to ask if you could speak to the toxicity in wild fish, in wild-caught fish, and any research and studies on that, since people often say, well, wild-caught fish is going to have a low toxic load compared to farmed fish.
Well, that's just untrue. I mean, it depends on what fish you're talking about. One of the major toxins is called BMAA, and it's a major cause of Parkinson's, dementia syndrome, and ALS. And there's clusters of ALS, that's like Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a very serious destructive disease, and these are brain destructive diseases. And there's clusters of cases around Chesapeake Bay and around inland lakes where people are eating more fish from inland lakes or around coastal waterways. And the reason for that isn't just the thousands of tons of plastic they dump in the ocean every hour. It's the fact that we have agricultural runoff putting more nitrogenous waste in the oceans and in the lakes, which leads to algae overgrowth in all waterways. And the algae overgrowth grows cyanobacteria, which then filter back down the BMA toxin to the bottom of the lakes picked up by bivalves and shellfish. So the oysters, scallops, clams, and mussels are the bivalves, and the shellfish like lobster and crab might have 20 to 50 times as much of these neurotoxic chemicals. But then the smaller fish living off the continental shelves are full of microplastic particles. When you used to eat a piece of a sardine or a small fish, now they eat the whole fish with the digestive tract intact. They're eating all the plastic, and the average American now has a credit card amount of plastics, which are endocrine disruptors and cancer promoters. So the actual plastic and chemical compounds in fish are so severe in today's world that it's not even safe for a woman to avoid fish during her pregnancy. She also has to avoid fish 5 years before she gets pregnant, so these toxins can go down in the system, because the toxins in the human body that can be damaging to your growing baby can stay in the body for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. So the fish supply has become so toxic, and certainly we used to be concerned with heavy metals in large fish like swordfish and tuna and shark and mackerel and but now because they're predatory fish. But now even the non-predatory fish have been contaminated because the smaller fish live closer to the continental shelf where all the plastic dumping occurs, not in the deep ocean. So the deep ocean fish, the more larger, more predatory fish, have more toxic metals because they're predatory fish, and then the smaller fish are still more toxic. Certainly, you might get less toxic fish on a small Pacific island somewhere, you know what I mean? But still, the major continents that includes Europe, Norway, Sweden, England, Ireland, both sides of the United States, even the Alaskan coasts are heavily contaminated with dumping of garbage.
And that's where a lot of salmon fishing happens.
Right, and also the salmon fishing. So whether you get it from farm fish or wild fish, the fish are still exposed to these toxic waterways now.
Okay.
Now, being that we're talking about meat and toxins, I have a question. As far as I see a lot of individuals today, they're real proponents about the carnivore diet. We see individuals who are claiming they're reversing their chronic conditions, their autoimmune conditions, because they're eating an all-meat diet. Is there benefit to that? And what would be the long-term effects if that isn't healthy for somebody to do?
Right. Well, the first thing we have to recognize is that these diets have been adequately studied over the last few decades. It's not that there's no studies on them. And we have, from 2018 to 2023, there were 5 published studies that had hundreds of thousands of people. In each study, different studies from around the world, following people on diets that are higher in animal protein and lower in plant foods, like keto diets and carnivore diets. And they found that in a dose-dependent relationship, that the more animal protein in the diet, the shorter the lifespan was experienced. And the most early life deaths occurred. Early life deaths are defined as deaths before the age of 70. And the most early life deaths occurred in people on keto and carnivore diets. So even though there's some, how I should say, unusual cases that may benefit from it, one unusual case may be schizophrenia. When a person is, and sometimes there's medication-resistant seizure disorder, and you have the brain be in chronic ketosis, it can have an effect like a drug on the brain and reduce seizure occurrence or even reduce schizophrenic episodes. But those are, just because there's a medicinal effect from a chemical, being in chronic ketosis is very dangerous long term. But who knows? Maybe the drugs they use for schizophrenia are even more toxic, because those are not that great either. So there may be an occasional indication for some of these diets in a rare individual, but for the vast majority of people, they're going to radically shorten lifespan. We know keto diets, but in any case, we have people with many autoimmune conditions like psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, who go into lupus, who go into complete remission on a Nutritarian diet, because we eliminated a lot of the toxins, and a lot of the toxins in the microbiome being unfavorable from eating an American diet. We fixed the microbiome, and we fixed the nutrient density of the cells, and the body's autoimmune diseases go away. But in some cases, that damage can lead to a hypersensitivity to plant antigens because of the poor microbiome and the poor level of cellular phytochemicals. So you have immunosuppression, a leaky gut, and bacterial inflammation in the gut. And some of those people are so sensitive to almost anything they eat. When they go on strictly meat and nothing else, they feel better because you have no plant antigens coming into the diet. But there's another way to skin the cat without taking 20 years of a person's life. You know what I mean? We can build back their health, the nutrient density, their immune system, and fix the gut without removing this plant antigens they're affected by. So I'd say it would be exceedingly rare that a person would ever need to do that to feel better when having to utilize that dietary modality is so risky and lifespan shortening.
Yeah. So it sounds as if they had focused on the root of the problem to begin with, they could have those benefits with the Nutritarian plant-based diet versus having to consume a carnivore diet.
That's correct. And we have many people that are allergic, even asthmatics that are allergic to cats, and hay fever and pollen. And their pollen and hay fever allergies go away. So you have many people with food allergies that were able to temporarily eliminate their food sensitivities. But over time, as we build a nutritional core and the bacterial and the healthy bacteria in the gut, then we can expand their diet and use what we call oral tolerance therapy, which means we start with low doses of those things they're sensitive to. And if they're immune, and we usually wait till they're eating healthily for a year before we do that anyway. And then we build back oral tolerance for those things they're sensitive to.
Now, you mentioned plant antigens. Would lectins be an example of that? And are there others that you can mention to those who might not know what plant antigens mean?
Yeah, well, there's antigens in every food. I mean, in other words, we have when you eat animal products, you have peptides that go through the digestive tract wall. In other words, the body is supposed to break down the proteins first into peptides, and peptides are smaller sequences of amino acids, and then break down the peptide bonds so you have individual amino acids, proteins, being absorbed into the bloodstream for utilization by the body. But when you have poor digestion and leaky gut, some of these peptide sequences of, 50 to 100 or, some numerous amino acids still linked, haven't been broken down, can flood into the bloodstream. And the body, those are antigens because they're now proteins that are not broken down into individual amino acids. So the body sees that as a foreign body and has to build an antibody against that antigen. So we get an antibody, and when the body overproduces antibodies and the suppressor cells are not functioning well, the body can overproduce antibodies to the antigen, and especially when you produce excessive antibodies to animal-based proteins too, because they look like, because animal meats look like human tissue. The sequences on amino acids look like human tissue. So a lot of people flare up with rheumatoid arthritis from eating animal protein too. So you have some people who flare up from eating animal proteins, and some people who flare up from eating certain plant proteins or lectins, but we want to be able to get their immune system so they're not going to be leaking these peptides into the bloodstream. In other words, anything that has protein in it, and all plant foods have protein. In other words, there are 5 categories of plant foods. Let's say there's fruit, vegetables, legumes and beans, nuts and seeds, and whole grains, right? So those are like 5 basic categories. The only one low in protein is fruit. The other 4, even whole grains, nuts and seeds, beans and vegetables, are all pretty high in protein. And a lectin is just a plant protein, it's just and lectins can cause serious reactions from beans if you're not cooking beans. Beans, particularly red beans and white beans, certain beans can cause a reaction against these so-called toxic lectins that are diffused when you cook the food. So it's an exaggeration, or you could say it's false information to think that cooked lectins are harmful, because all the studies on beans, and let me say that one more time, because I didn't say some of the studies on beans, I said all the studies on beans. All the studies comparing bean consumption and longevity show that bean consumptions are linked to longer lifespan, lower rates of cancer, and lower rates of heart attacks. Scientists even call this the Hispanic effect. That means that how come in food deserts, where people are economically challenged and they're eating unhealthfully, and we see higher rates of cancer and more early life deaths in people who are eating more fast food and processed foods, how come the Hispanics in those poor areas don't fare as badly as, let's say, Black Americans living in the same area? And the answer is because they put some beans in their diet. They find whenever they add beans to the diet, the people have better health outcomes. And the blue zones are an example of areas of the world that particularly are living longer because their inclusion of beans. And, of course, a Nutritarian diet is not a blue zone diet. A blue zone gives the average maybe 8 to 10 years of extended lifespan, whereas a Nutritarian diet is utilizing all the best features of each individual blue zone and all the best features of thousands of studies. I reviewed more than 30,000 scientific studies to come to the foods that were most longevity promoting. And I also have 2,000 of those scientific references in my most recent book, Eat for Life. So it's very well studied. So we're taking the blue zone diet to a different level of longevity promoting efficacy to design a nutritarian diet. So now people's average lifespan can be around 100 years old, with a bell-shaped curve between 95 and 105 for most people, not between 70 and 80, the bell-shaped curve in America. Now we have around 76, 77. So we're talking about a much greater lifespan potential than is available to than even the blue zones are available to the blue zones.
That's exciting.
So, so when we're talking about the blue zones, we've heard some controversy as far as, well, they drink some alcohol and they eat some meat as well. So, I mean, there are centenarians that are living a very long life, but they're incorporating some of these things that we're talking about eliminating from
But that's not true that they're living a very long life. We don't buy a car by comparing it to a junkyard wreck. The American diet and the modern, we're living so short in lifespans that the blue zones do a little bit better. Most people in the blue zones are living around 85 to 88 years old, or they're in their 80s when they pass. They're not in their 90s or 100 years old. They're just a little better. They're certainly better. You put tomato sauce on your food instead of frying it in oil, you're going to do better outcomes. Certainly the blue zones are better, and the Mediterranean style diets with more tomato sauce and beans and vegetables are better than the fast food Americans, but they're not an ideal to be held as something that good example of healthy nutrition, because that's not the lifespan of human species. Is not still not 85 years old. Don't forget, you're saying centenarians. There's only like 1 in 10,000 people live over 100 years old in America today, and only 3 in 10,000 that live in the blue zones over 100 years old. So there's still centenarians are rare in the blue zones. Just because there are more centenarians there than there are here, is they're still relatively rare. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But also their disease rates, are those also increasing then in those blue zone areas? Like, so you could be nearing 100, but you still have a bunch of, morbidities and atherosclerosis, or you've had strokes or something like that.
No, not really. I mean, what I'm saying is that the rate of comorbidities are higher in populations that die younger. As lifespans increase, in direct proportion, the comorbidities where people are living in poor health also go down. And the longer people live, the more the comorbidities are reduced. So you think it's the opposite. People living longer with more disease and more dementia and more, diabetes and more leg amputations, more kidney disease. But no, it's not the case. They're living longer with less amputations and less kidney disease and less blindness and less dementia. Because the more the diet's designed to enhance lifespan, the less of these other comorbidities that develop. So people are living longer. So the blue zones are better than Americans in all those other aspects, but not as good as what we see. And I'm obviously been doing this for so many decades that I have so many nutritarian people that have came to me with advanced heart disease in their 50s and 60s and 70s, who have been in their 70 years old when they switched their diet, and they've lived to be 98 years old or 102. So we're seeing these people doing really magnificently well when they adopt a diet this healthfully that blows the results of the blue zones out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Can you give some more examples of people who've tried your nutritarian approach and have made a radical lifestyle change in elderly, when in their elderly years, and then have reversed some of their health conditions?
Yes, and don't forget, I have more than 500 of such cases on my website, where people can scroll through 500 cases like that of people who've recovered their health. And a lot of people who are, I've had, for example, a person in the hospital, unable to leave the ICU, hooked up to heart-lung machines and with uncontrolled diabetes and cardiac arrhythmias. They couldn't get the heart back into a normal rhythm with implantation, with shock. They said to the family, he's probably not going to make it. We probably have to, call your relatives in from around the country. And so they got so as a last-ditch effort, they allowed them to bring the nutritarian diet into the hospital, right? Yeah. Because they said, okay, he's going to die anywhere. So what happens? The guy's, within a few days, his diabetes is well controlled, the sugar goes down, the heart goes into a normal rhythm again, the medications start to work. Slowly, his blood pressure goes back to normal, taking him off his medications, taking him off these dangerous antiarrhythmic drugs they had him on, and he's able to leave the hospital. He drops 80 pounds, and and within 6 months, he doesn't need medication anymore. And you know what? After these people are in heart failure and have their heart attacks, their ejection fraction goes down. Even my father-in-law had a massive heart attack 22 years ago, and he had an ejection fraction, which is normally around 60, goes down to like 25%. Half of the heart function is lost. And the cardiologist says, 5 to 10 years, maybe he could survive. And now he's alive 22 years later, and his ejection fraction on his echocardiogram comes back to normal. Now he has a normal ejection fraction. He never followed my advice before he had his heart attack, but then afterwards, he made a diet change. But so we have many, many people with serious medical conditions, including people with multiple sclerosis getting well, and people with psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis clearing. But like, for example, a woman was on the National Renal Transplant list waiting for a new kidney due to lupus and lupus nephritis that's destroying her kidney. Her creatinine was 4.2, which represents loss of more than 90% of kidney function. After 6 months of following this program, she never got the kidney transplant. They couldn't find her a kidney, and her kidney went back to normal, and her creatinine went down to 0.8. So her lupus went away, her kidney function healed itself. Like, totally is shocking to me. And talking about some of the elderly cases, one woman, Irene, she had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that went away completely with no treatment except for the diet and the supplements. She was slowly melted away. No chemotherapy, no radiation. Her lymphoma just melted away. So just like I have many people who had stage 4 ovarian cancer. One woman with metastatic ovarian cancer into her lung, where they had 4 liters of metastatic fluid taken out of her lung. She did receive chemotherapy, but that was like 25 years ago. Now she's still alive. She's in her late 90s, and she never had a recurrence of ovarian cancer. She was only given like 6 months to live. They said, chemo's not going to work for this. You have metastatic cancer spread through the body, because people know that when you treat cancer with chemo, it doesn't kill every cancerous cell. It leaves some stray cells that survive and pop up and kill the person 5 or 10 years later, because the cells that pop up with a secondary growth of cancer 5 or 10 years later are the ones that escaped chemo the first time. And they're more resistant to treatment the second time, and they die from these secondary cancers. So all these people with advanced cancer that are living now 20, 30 years later that follow my program, whether they're treated with chemo or not, they're not getting secondary cancers. Because the body's immune system, maybe sometimes it couldn't get out the tumor or the large, massive cancer cells, but the stray cells that survived or that may scattered through the body's able to seek out, identify, and destroy those cells and not allow them to come back as a secondary cancer.
That's amazing.
That's cool.
So I'm curious. I know each case is going to be different, but I mean, generally, how quickly does an individual start to see improvements when they incorporate a nutritarian lifestyle, especially if they have a chronic condition?
That is such a great question, because I have this retreat in San Diego, as you know, and it's so amazing that after people eat poorly for like 40, 50, or 60 years, they've eaten junk food and they're diabetic and they have high blood pressure and heart disease. And in 1 month of eating healthfully, just 1 month, they're not diabetic anymore. Just 1 month, their high blood pressure is all gone. I'm amazed at how fast it works, that 75 to 80% of people with diabetes or high blood pressure are non-diabetic and normalize their blood pressure, so they need no medications for either disease within 1 month period. Certainly some people take 3 or 4 months too, but the majority of people are all better within 1 month. It's so fascinating. Even before they've lost all their excess weight. They lose maybe 20 pounds the first month and maybe 15 pounds the second month. So in 2 months, they've lost 35 pounds, but they're still 40 pounds overweight. Even they were 70 pounds overweight, now they lost 35 pounds, but their diabetes is gone. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see, and kind of shocking to see how fast it occurs. I would think the person would have to eat healthy for a couple of years to get rid of their diabetes. But no, a couple of months, not a couple of years.
That is so neat. So we meet a lot of individuals, and I grew up this way, vegan, vegetarian, and sadly, in plant-based, and sadly, I see a lot of individuals in this vegan community, and they say, hey, I'm eating the ideal diet, but they look so sickly, and they don't look like they have vibrance when you look at them. So I'm curious, why is that? Are they experiencing, is it deficiencies? Is it depletion in nutrition from the soil? But I see a lot of these individuals, they're living based off of what they could open with a can opener, what they could put in the microwave, and they're eating a lot of high processed vegan foods, and they say, well, I'm eating the best diet out there because it's vegan and it's
Right.
not consuming the animal foods. But I look at some of these ingredients in the nutritional labels, and the saturated fat is high or higher than if you went and ate some cheese.
Yeah, well, you guys know that I have no, what's the word, bias on the harm of processed foods versus animal products as to which is worse. When people cut out the animal products and eat processed foods, it's no better a diet. They're not going to have longer lifespans. Or when people cut out, so we're trying to reduce both processed foods, including oils. Oils are, people think oil is a health food, and I'm telling people that there's no such thing as a healthy overweight person. Even being 10 pounds overweight is significant impairing immune function, shortening lifespan. Even just 10 pounds of body fat. That you can't be in optimal health unless for a male's body fat below 15% and a female's body fat below 25%. So everybody's overweight. I go to these vegan conferences and plant-based conferences and I'm lecturing. I'm looking around the room and everybody's overweight. Everybody, they're eating processed foods, they're eating oils, so there are no different risks than the people eating animal products, basically. It's us Nutritarians, our diet is SOS free, right? We're sugar, oil, and salt free, SOS free, and particularly not eating fried foods and not eating foods cooked in oil, which is empty calories. And don't forget, oil is a caloric rush food. It goes into the bloodstream so rapidly, and you put so much calories in the blood that it has this stimulatory effect on the apostat in the central nervous system to make you want to eat more calories. It makes you addicted to a higher caloric load. So whether you're a vegan or not, these people are consuming double the calories humans need. The average human, all primitive societies, even today, if you look at rural China, they eat about 1,500 calories a day. In America, we eat 3,100 calories a day. We eat more than 3,000 calories, more than double what primitive humans ate. Double the calories. How do you expect to have healthy humans? So you have vegans eating double the calories that humans eat, and they're all overweight, but the major deficiencies on a vegan diet, if it's not supplemented properly, are B12, zinc, and DHA, EPA, or DHA. Those are the three deficiencies. And I got into this movement via my father, who got well through studying Dr. Herbert Shelton's books, who were written in the 1950s and 60s through the American Natural Hygiene Society. That was my introduction into healthy eating through those books. And when I became a doctor years later, so I got introduced to this in my teens, right? My young teen, when I was, 12, 13, 14 years old. I became more interested in reading more about it when I was 17, 18, 19, when I was older. But when I saw the leaders of the natural hygiene movement, when I became a physician, they became elderly. Most of them developed dementia or Parkinson's disease because they became my patients. They came to me with medical problems. And I noted a tremendous high probability of being omega-3 index being very low, DHA deficient. And there's a correlation between deficiency in omega-3 index in Parkinson's disease, dementia, and brain shrinkage and cognitive impairment, right? So I'm very cognizant of that risk because Dr. Shelton died of Parkinson's, Dr. Sidwa died of Parkinson's, Dr. Vetrano was leader in the movement, had dementia, Joy Gross had dementia, I could name every leader of that community because people say, oh, those vegans were not healthy eating vegans. They're the ones eating junk food. But no, these were not junk food eating vegans. These were people who lived on fruits and vegetables and nuts and beans. They were Shelton advocates. And these Shelton advocates from the natural hygiene movement were really into eating all natural foods, everything you can grow, and eating no animal products and no supplements and no processed foods. They ate healthy, but now we realize how important it is to know your omega-3 index and supplement with DHA, EPA appropriately to keep that index in the right range to maintain normal brain function if we're going to live to be 90 to 100 years old. If you're going to be dead at 80 or 75 at 80, like all other Americans, maybe it's not so important because you don't need that level of DHA to protect the brain when you're young, just like we don't need. So in other words, we have increased needs as we age. And if we're going to live longer, we have to do the right things when we're middle-aged and young to maintain our muscle and bone strength and brain size and immune system strength as we're older. And talking about immune system strength, zinc is critical to prevent immunosenescence. Our immune system winds down with aging. And even though we get zinc with plant foods, number one, you get higher, richer sources of zinc in animal products, especially seafood and bivalves, but like oysters are high in zinc, but they're just too contaminated. And when we get our zinc from plant foods, the phytic acid or the phytates bind zinc. So people on plant-based diets, even though we're getting zinc, we have a higher requirement for zinc because we're not absorbing it as readily. So taking a little extra zinc is beneficial. Because years ago, because I think a lot of vegans recognize that we're not getting adequate B12, but they don't recognize the importance of a little extra zinc and a little DHA, EPA, to make sure that we have nutritional adequacy across the board. Now, some people may produce enough DHA because they could say, well, your body converts it and makes it from the algae, makes it from the walnuts and the flax seeds and the green vegetables. You make enough. But my experience with testing the blood tests on hundreds and hundreds of people is that most people do not make enough. Even when they eat perfectly, even when they eat everything right, even when they're having all the omega-3, it's very genetically dependent on the conversion ability, the conversion enzymes. And even though some people, and it's usually less than 10 or 20% that make enough, 80% usually don't make enough, even when they eat super healthfully or adjust their diet for some nutritional gymnastics to try to make more DHA naturally. They can't make the right amount. Because right now we're seeing that the optimal amount is to get the omega-3 index above 5, even above 5.5. I used to think it should be above 4. But we're seeing enhanced longevity and better protection for brain size with aging if you keep it above 5.
Thank you for mentioning, going back to the omega-3 index and mentioning that it's not really a problem with intake, like eating enough walnuts or flax seeds or other nuts and seeds, but it's the conversion rate. So what's happening cellularly going on, that's a limiting factor there. So your prescription then would be to take an actual DHA EPA supplement, right?
That's right. And I do sell a supplement that I procure from the company in the United States that makes all the supplements. All the DHA supplements in the United States are made by the same manufacturer. And the reason I decided to have them made for my patients and my guests and people who are getting using my advice is because I studied the rancidity scores of most of these supplements, and because they're stored out of the refrigerator and they're not packed right, but mostly because they're at room temperature. We kept them at room temperature, and we showed that after 4 or 5 months, the TBA scores documenting rancidity numbers started to increase. And by 9 or 10 months, you had high levels of rancidity. So people are taking rotten oils. So we got them. So when I noticed when I was in practice for so many years, people getting burping or smell, or it didn't taste right, the oils didn't taste right. So we had them packed in dark glass bottles, and we kept them in refrigeration. So the product that I make available for people is a refrigerated product, so the oil can be maintained with a higher degree of freshness. So the TBA scores, the rancidity score is low. We don't want people supplementing with rotten oils. And most fish oils and algae oils on the market have some degree of rancidity or rottenness. So we want, if preferably, people use a fresh oil.
Yeah. Now, you were mentioning as far as the health leaders were when you were younger. Later on in life, they were coming down with these neurological issues. What could they have done differently? I know you're talking about supplementing, but were some of these supplements available then? What could they have done with their health to have prevented this?
Prevented like Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's.
Yeah, if they're just focusing on food, because the average person doesn't have the option to just go to the ocean and get their DHA from sea vegetables.
Right. You're right. I think in those days that we were saying cutting all fish out of the diet, or wild animals out of the diet, like lizards and frogs and worms and snakes, whatever it is that primitive humans ate, but cutting out all omega-3 preformed foods out of the diet is not necessarily ideal if we're going to live that long to maintain brain size. So seafood, or eating some seafood or some fish oil, is beneficial to brain size for a lot of humans, for the majority of humans. And so maybe you're right. It's a good point. I never thought of that. That some of these early pioneers, like Dr. Shelton, he didn't have access to plant-based oils. But he wasn't a strict vegan either. He occasionally ate some dairy products, so he might have been willing to take a fish oil. They did make fish oil products back then, but back in the 1940s and 1950s and 1960s, they didn't make the plant-based oils. The algae-based DHA oils weren't available then. So he would have had to use a fish oil or to eat a little bit of fish. But if he ate a little bit of oyster or a little bit of food in those days, it wouldn't have been as contaminated and toxic as those foods are today. Today, it's more important to avoid seafood than it was back in the 1950s and 60s when the oceans weren't so contaminated.
So today you would recommend our average heart patient not to have any fish oils, but to take a pure form of DHA, EPA to lower that inflammation rate to protect the heart and the brain and the neurons too. Is that right?
Right. Mostly to protect the shrinkage of the brain that occurs with aging. Our muscles shrink with aging. Our bones shrink with aging. We don't live forever. Our immune systems shrink. The capacity of our immune system to defend against cancer and to defend against infection goes down with aging. And our memory and creativity and brain function, our brain shrinks with aging as well. So we're trying to, as we increase the ability of the human to live longer, we're trying to counteract the loss of muscle, bone, brain loss, and immune system loss with the smart use of and the judicious use of supplementation. Because too much fish oil can also be immunosuppressive too, or cause. It's what's interesting is if you look at the studies, omega-3 deficiency can cause atrial fibrillation, but excess omega-3 from taking too much fish oil can also cause atrial fibrillation. Low levels of, let's say, iodine can cause hypothyroidism, and excessive iodine can cause hypothyroidism. It's you got to be in the sweet spot in the middle. So a person who wants to disagree with what they're hearing here could say, Dr. Fuhrman's wrong. Look, here's a study showing people taking high fish oils had more atrial fib and more of this problem, more immune function dysfunction. Yeah, that's true because they took such high dosages. We're not taking, there's always a sweet spot. Excessive amounts of certain things can be harmful too. So we're not telling people pop huge amounts of fish oil in the, we're just trying to get that omega-3 index elevated into that safe range. The same thing with zinc. We're not telling people, it's like a little is good, so a lot is more. It's not necessarily true. And so usually for most nutrients, especially fat-soluble nutrients like vitamin D, can be toxic in excessive amounts too also.
Okay.
Now, are you basing this off of blood tests? I mean, is it a one-size-fits-all? How does somebody know if they need to supplement with more omegas or DHA? Or even zinc for that matter?
That's exactly the point I'm making, is that the blood test that we should all know if we're on a strict vegan diet and we're avoiding seafood, and we're not eating clams and oysters and shellfish and seafood, and it's smart not to, especially for women of childbearing ages and to create birth defects. We really got to watch these things. And the baby is the Geiger counter. You know what I mean by that? That we don't even see the radiation exposure. We don't see the toxins. But if it's damaging to a baby, just because we don't see it in an adult, it's still going to shorten your lifespan and damage you too. But the baby is the Geiger counter. It shows more damage when so we're talking about things that damage your baby when you eat it during pregnancy are damaging to us when we're not pregnant too. But the answer to your question is yes, we should all know our omega-3 index. Especially if we're not eating seafood, and it's a blood test, it could be a finger stick or a regular blood. And the levels that are not only protective for the aging of the brain, shrinkage of the brain with aging, but also are linked to longer lifespan, to be between 5.5 and 9 on the blood test. 5.5 and 9. Above, we don't want to push it above 9, and we don't want, so I think it's wise to know the level, because some people supplementing with omega-3 oil, like even if they're using my product, their levels are still 4.8 or 5.2 or 4, and they still need a little extra to get their level above 5.5. The dose and some people don't need hardly any or need none. I know 2 guys whose levels are 7 with no supplements at all. Their omega-3 index is 7, they take nothing. I'm telling you, levels 7, you're okay on with nothing. So yeah, I think you should at least know your omega-3 index because that does play a role in the size of your brain. We have more than a dozen studies correlating the brain size with aging to omega-3. And in spite of those dozen studies, you have plant-based community leaders telling people, don't worry about it, you're okay without it. It's very irresponsible because they're so, philosophically and religiously enthusiastic about a plant-based diet that they just hate to say anything's wrong with it or needs any, but in doing so, I think it's irresponsibly putting people at risk.
It's more of like an ideology.
Yeah, it's an ideology, and their egos and their personalities are involved with the idea that you don't need supplements. You know what I mean, for this way of eating.
I wanted to ask you if you've done any study on the soil, the health of the soil in modern agriculture, and any results on trace mineral depletion, and if you've noticed any changes with that throughout the last few decades, and how that's impacted the nutritarian diet, because I know a lot of the leafy greens you encourage are very rich in these trace minerals,
Yeah,
and
and
a
that's a
lot
great
of
question.
the soil. So
Absolutely, that's a great question, and it's only been recent that we've had studies that show that plants that are grown in natural organic soil and compost and natural decaying matter have higher amounts of phytochemicals and antioxidants. Because you're right, what you're insinuating is what we're trying to go for. That's we're trying to increase the nutrient concentration of each cell in your body. That each cell has more phytochemicals, more nutrients, because we measure people's nutrient levels like the carotenoid score. They're super low because their whole body is low in nutrients because they're not eating foods that are rich in nutrients. And people say, well, but you're right. A piece of, a vegetable is not a vegetable, and particularly we're saying that we do have more nutritional richness in foods grown in better soils. And my friend Ron Weiss, who's a medical doctor in New Jersey, used to live in the area, has a farm where he treats people with a nutritarian diet, growing a lot of the vegetables right on his own farm, so he can control the soil. So, and especially when people are sick with like lupus and we want to get people well, it's the quality of the food can play a enhancing role in the outcome. And that's why here too, I have vegetable garden beds. I make my own compost. I get the bacteria and the worms. It's kind of, and we grow, and I fertilize the fruit trees. I have 120 fruit trees and vegetable garden beds. We're growing our own lettuce and bok choy and beets and carrots and garlic, and we grow all this great stuff. And the things taste better too. But what's funny is I make the compost is gold because I take the tree that I planted in good soil, and as the tree gets bigger, I'm digging this big hole in it like a donut shape around the tree. I'm digging 3 foot down and like 2 foot wide and filling it all in with really good soil instead of the crummy clay soil here in San Diego, that thick red clay that is like a pot, like a clay pot. The roots have nowhere to go. So we dig deep holes and reach and fill in with good soil. So I take the food scraps and the weeds and some natural, shredding of mulch, so clean mulch, and I mix it with some horse manure from the neighbors, and I mix that in with some, and I put like green pig or some kind of bacteria on top to decompose it, cover it with a reflective coating after it's well watered to get the heat in there, and you can keep a thermometer in there to 100 degrees to make it decay for a few months. So the weeds and the dirt and the mulch and the horse manure, and I'm making my own, fertilizer, so to speak, my own compost. And then once the thermometer goes down to 80 degrees, because now it's going to go up to like 80 to 100 degrees while it's decomposing with the bacteria I added. And then once it goes down to 80 degrees, we uncover it, water it again, and we fill it in with worms, with composting worms. Another 2 months of composting worms, and we have this rich, dark, rich soil material that we use to grow the vegetables in and stuff. Yeah, it's true is that, and also sprouting adds to nutrient, that sprouting and eating baby foods like microgreens can add to the nutrient quality. But everybody should be growing some of their own food in rich soil. Back around the World War II time, the government called it, I think, what they call it, like, we try to encourage people.
victory
Grow
gardens.
Victory gardens. Yeah, everybody should have a garden in their house, right? To grow their own foods, to leave the other food to be shipped overseas. And half of America, I should say this, half of the calories consumed in America around the 1940s and 1950s were foods that people grew in their own homes. 50% of what people ate was foods grown in their own homes. And now what is it, 1%? So yes, everybody should be growing at least some of their food in healthy soil that they can make in their own homes. And if you can't do that and you're living in an apartment, then at least sprout food and make microgreens in plates. In trays, microgreens and sprouts in trays, and get a sprouting device.
Do you recommend sprouting over microgreens, or what are your thoughts on which is better? Both?
I don't know.
Yeah.
They're
Okay.
both fantastic sources of nutrients.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a few questions about children, picky eating, child health, and I know you've written a book, Disease Proof Your Children, and it's an excellent book. And we have 3 little ones ourselves, a 1-year-old, 4-year-old, and 6-year-old, and they eat their greens and they eat their cooked spinach. But how can you give some encouragement or some tips or advice on families who are trying to encourage their children to eat more nutrient-dense foods?
It's funny because I take the opposite approach. I sit down with the children. I say, this is crazy. You've got to protect your parents. They're committing suicide with food. You got to watch what they're eating and get them to stop eating stuff that they're eating because they're overweight, they're overeating, and they have a healthy kid. But you don't want your parents to die. No, they're like eating themselves to death. We got to get the parents on a healthy diet, you guys. And then they say, okay, what should we get our parents to do? They got to eat a salad every day, and they got to eat vegetables every day, and they got to stop. So we train the kids to keep an eye on their parents. You know what I mean? It works better than the parents keeping an eye on the kids. It doesn't work with the parents. That's called a hypocrite, right? When the unhealthy eating parent is trying to tell the kid to eat vegetables, fix your own plate first. Then you know what I mean? Be the role model, fix and make some healthy food in the house and get in great shape for everybody that knows, it's like, so if we want our kids to eat healthy, we have to live that. We have to walk the walk and be healthy examples of great health. My kids see me at age 70, and they see me skiing down mountains at high speed. I clocked myself at, moguls and playing singles tennis and sprinting them, reading a sprint. And they see me in physical condition and good health, and they see and they see, well, I'm going to be healthy. I want to be healthy too. They're not going to, if you can't encourage a child, you can't force them to eat healthy. You got to demonstrate that to them. So we talk about it. We have conversations. It's not forcing them to eat healthy food. It's exposing them to the right food. And I remember when my daughter, Kara, who's now 30 years old, she's my youngest daughter. And when she was 4 years old, she went to a boot camp at Health Quest where we exercise, right? And she was in the boot camp and she called it Boo Boo Camp. And I was in the area lifting weights. And I go to pick her up and she says to me at age 4, don't these parents love their children? They're feeding them junk food like candy corn and like all kinds of junk. And I said to her at the age 4, I said, they don't know what we know. They don't know that these foods make your body, that you are what you eat, And she says to me, how could they be so stupid? And I try to explain to a 4-year-old about cognitive dissonance, about how a person that blocks out of their mind and everybody else is doing it, so they think it's okay. But they don't. But in any case, they're all ubiquitously food addicts who put all kinds of garbage in their mouth and they feed their children garbage, So the main thing is, so my kids always, when they were young, they could see the attraction to eating pizza and ice cream, and they could say, I could see why people would want to do it, but I can't see why the parents bring the donuts to the soccer games and want to push the junk on the kids. Why are the parents the sabotagers? Why don't they want the kids to eat healthy? So it's like the parents are the ones that sabotage the kids. My kids are lived in a household of all healthy food. They could eat whatever they want, whenever they wanted to eat, and anything they wanted to eat, they could eat because it was all healthy choices. Whatever was around was healthy. And then when they were out of the house, at a friend's house or at some event, and they saw unhealthy things, they might want to taste something and they could see the attraction to it, but they wouldn't want to eat it regularly because they knew it wasn't good for them. I remember when my son, he's my youngest, he's 22. When he was about, I think, 5 years old, he went to the elementary school because his sisters were performing in the choir, right? They were singing. So we took him there to see his sisters sing. And as he walks in the door, the person at the front door hands him a chocolate chip cookie. They're giving away cookies at the door of the school, right? So he's never seen a chocolate chip cookie before because he's, in the house eating healthy foods. It's all a healthy environment. He looks at that, he smells it, takes a little nibble. We're just watching him like a scientist is watching an experiment. What is this kid going to do when he sees a chocolate chip cookie, when he tastes it? This is going to be interesting. So he takes a nibble of the cookie and he goes, yuck, that's junk food. And he throws it back at them. He never had something that sweet before. We had fruit, of course, but he never had, ice cream made out of macadamia nuts and bananas and vanilla bean powder and all kinds of fancy desserts and popsicles and frozen popsicle sticks and that we made healthfully, all kinds of healthy treats, but not something with that much sugar in it. And so even today, he doesn't like something that sweet. It's like too sweet for them. They don't even like stuff that other, you know what I mean? They're looking for they love the Nutritarian desserts that are made with a little bit of date, yeah, but not something that are made the high degree of sugar and chemicals in a conventional dessert. So I don't know. I think it's not that difficult to do when the parents are cohesively united about being role models and taking care of their own health and walking the walk and living the life and making the healthy food in their own house. It doesn't take too much extra work other than just talking about why you live healthfully and why other people don't, to have your kids live healthfully. They may not be perfect, but they're going to choose, but make good choices, you know?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about honey because I know that some studies show that honey has a similar effect on the immune system that sugar does. And I think you recommend just basically use dates as sweetener. So only dates and
Well,
even
any dried fruit.
any dried fruit. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'll use dried apricots to sweeten things too, or I'll use dried cherries or dried golden fruit or whatever, goji berries, whatever the recipe calls for. But yeah, I don't usually give more than one date per person per serving. Like if I'm when the vanilla ice cream made with frozen banana, I'm putting no date in it at all. The banana's sweet enough. But when we put the cocoa powder in and the cocoa nibs, then it makes it more bitter, so you can add a medjool date. Usually, if we're making 8 servings, we put in 4 medjool dates for 8 servings. So that's half a medjool date per serving, which makes it taste more chocolatey and have a more rich flavor. You know what I mean? So we don't have to add that much date to it even. Even if it gets too sweet, I feel like, oh, I'd rather have a bigger portion and not have it so sweet. I'd rather have more, I'd have to eat more of it that I'd like it. Let's say, and we make like these panna cottas and these like that are made with what are they made with? Agar. It makes it like a natural jello, and we make like a soy banana or a soy strawberry or soy mango we make some of these like soft jello-like molds, and we put a little berry compote on top, like a cherry or berry compote on top of the panna cotta, and it tastes better when it's like not so sweet because you can taste the sweetness of the berry with the creamy jello flavor. So we don't need something that sweet. So once we acclimate to this nutritarian diet, the conventional desserts taste too sweet to us. We like the lower degree of sweetness on our nutritarian desserts, so we can eat a nicer sized portion of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you speak though to the impact of diet in the child's life and how that sets them up for success or more disease, morbidity, mortality? Because I know there's the rapid cell turnover that happens during a
Yes.
child's growth and lifespan, and how those cells are opening up and being exposed to the toxins or the nutrients. Can you speak to that?
Right. I mean, I talked about that first in my book, Disease Proof Your Child.
Yeah.
I think that was written in 2006 or 2008, something like that. And then I talked about it more in my book, Fast Food Genocide, that was written, I think, in 2019. So yeah, I mean, the idea that people think they're young, they can smoke cigarettes, they can eat any kind of garbage they want, and they'll just get healthy as they get older. And often that's a mistake because we know that when we get breast cancer or prostate cancer at the age of 60 or 70 or 80 years old, the major causative factors of that cancer is what you ate between age 5 and age 15 or age 5 and age 20. But so we're saying here that, and even exposure to toxins and unhealthy food in childhood, like when you don't breastfeed your children or you feed them unhealthy as a child, I talked about that when the child is growing, their cells are dividing at a more rapid rate than adult cells are dividing. And when cells are replicating and dividing, the DNA, which is normally wrapped around the golf ball, like the rubber band tightly wrapped on a golf ball, the DNA is wound up. And when the cell replicates, the DNA unravels itself and spreads itself out. So as the cell's replicating, it can have more damage points to DNA and more methylation defects occur to toxins and lack of nutrients. So it's critically important. So my children learned when they were young that eating unhealthily when you're young can result in problems down the road. So many times, though, the human mind doesn't think that way. They don't make decisions that are going to benefit themselves 40, 50, 60 years down the road. They're just looking for instantaneous gratification, and they worry about that once they get sick. But unfortunately, with cancer and with dementia, you can't wait till you get cancer, wait till you get dementia, because the best way to protect against those diseases is to prevent them from occurring to begin with proper nutrition earlier in life. And that's why we're getting kids to eat healthier. That's why we want women of childbearing ages to eat healthier. We're exploding autism, and the autism and exploding infections, autism and allergies, and brain dysfunction, all these things that are causing all over that are spiraling at an upward rate, not just because the diet women are eating when they're pregnant, but even the diet they're eating before the baby is conceived affects the outcome of the baby. So we see that even the lack of green vegetables and the consumption of luncheon meats and processed foods and fast foods, fried fast foods in the diet, can increase the child's risk of getting child cancer or brain tumors, even if they ate it before they got pregnant. So high consumption of hot dogs and bacon before they pastrami, and so that's why I object to this idea of women taking folic acid during their pregnancy, because it instead of utilizing the educational system and the informational system to tell people how important it is to green vegetables to get folate. Green vegetables and beans are very high in folate. Instead, we give them a synthetic pill, like a pharmaceutical answer to not eating green vegetables to prevent birth defects instead of eating greens. And the lack of green vegetables are linked to birth defects and heart defects and brain and childhood cancer. We have an explosion of acute blastocytic leukemia in children because the parents don't eat healthfully. So yeah, it's a whole society thing. It's at all ages of life. It's from birth to death, and even before your child is born, what you eat affects their health. So our whole society has to change, and we have to protect our climate. We have to protect the world. We have to protect against. So we want to make the world a safe place for our children, and organic farming and regenerative agriculture is the key, and plant-based eating with regenerative farming is the key to protecting our world and saving the world for future generations. So we have to socially and politically change the way people think. People want instantly what they want right now. They want power, control. They want instant gratification. They want nobody to tell them what to do. And that way of thinking is going to be destroying the earth for the future people, for our children and grandchildren,
Do you recommend to your patients and guests at your retreats to eat all organic, especially produce, or at least stick with the dirty, like avoiding the dirty dozen?
Well, here our diet we eat here is 100% organic.
Mhm.
I eat nothing that's not organic.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. I can afford it. I can grow my own food, and I have local farmers here in California that grow organically, and it's every farmer's market down the street has the organic produce. So we're very lucky to eat all organic. That's one of the reasons I moved to California, is I wanted to have access to all these healthy foods and great tasting fruits too. But I mean, people have to do the best they can wherever they're living.
Yeah.
And so you're right. The dirty dozen particularly, get your leafy greens and your kale and your bok choy. Get that stuff organic. I would not eat strawberries and berries. I would eat blackberries and strawberries. Good. Make sure they're organic. Grapes are heavily treated too. The raisins and grapes should be strictly organic. But we just eat everything organic because we can afford it and we have it available here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who are not familiar with Dirty Dozen, so those are the 12 highest sources of produce with highest amounts of pesticide residues on them. So they're the more contaminated ones. So
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Fuhrman. Did you have any other questions?
Yeah. So if somebody's watching this and they're saying, okay, I want to incorporate a healthier lifestyle. I recognize the importance of a Nutritarian lifestyle. Where's the best place for them to start? I know you have multiple books. What book would you recommend for them?
I've written 12 books, but I guess the best place to start is just start with the most recent book, because it has the most updated references and the most recent science, Eat for Life. And because my best-selling book that sold so many millions was Eat to Live. But it's good, but it's not as updated as Eat for Life. So I'd recommend they start with that. And on my website, I have lots of information people could read and lots of videos and, introductory material they can learn from. So yeah, so it's not that difficult to do this. It's very enjoyable. We get tremendous pleasure and satisfaction from being role models, and we get to know people from around the world, and we see these magical cases of people recovering their health, which is so emotionally fulfilling. And so we're not deprived. It's a blessing to be able to share, to be able to live this way and share it with people.
I also wanted to put a plug in for your PDF plans that you have on your website. Like if people want to lose weight or to correct their diabetes, improve their insulin resistance and lower their blood sugars, you have some transformative.
Right. I have those booklets.
those
diet
booklets.
plans and menu plans and recipes and to make it really easy for people, make it such a no-brainer. So we're giving people, tools and services that helps them achieve their better health. So there's no person that really hasn't. There's no excuses. If you want to get well, you can do it. There's no excuse. You can, and if you can't do it on your own, you can come in. So it's like, you can, and we're giving you all the information. You could do it on your own. You don't have to come here to do it.
Yeah, we'll put those links in the description too. But I want to say I've used some of those as a dietitian. I've used some of those with my patients, and I've had one person come back to me who actually stuck with it and said, "You've changed my life," and it was using one of your diet plans, and it was very
Cool.
exciting. So
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for what you guys do too, and appreciate our camaraderie. It's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad we could have this interview. I heard years ago the best time to start was 10 years ago, and the next best time to start is right now. So it's never too late if you're experiencing poor health or you want to improve your health. So thank you so much, Dr. Fuhrman. Any last words that you have before we close?
No, just wishing everybody, great health and much happiness always, and take care of your. It's really worth it to take good care of your health, to enjoy the world around us.
yes.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, we will leave links to your retreat, to your books, to your supplements in the description of this video for those who want to check out what you're doing so they could incorporate your research, your education to better their health. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. We just want to say thank you again to Dr. Fuhrman for this interview. It was really enlightening, and I think we certainly learned some good information.
And if you felt motivated and inspired by this interview, please let us know in the comments below, or if there was something new you learned.
And stay tuned for the next interview with Barbara O'Neill. She's an author, educator, and qualified naturopath, and she teaches individuals how they could place their body in the right conditions so they can naturally self-heal. Stay tuned. We look forward to that interview.